Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Resilience Hub, our hub, your hub. It's amazing an idea that was set out 3 years ago to create a hub that could bring all the conversations around adaptation and resilience into one single house has evolved to a point in which we can host these kind of events. And I'm very proud of being, as Atlantic Council, one of the managing partners of this hub. Today, I want to pass the baton to my dear friend and colleague, Lenio Miribili. She is the UN Habitat and Archrock Global Chief Heat Officer, but also she is member of the advisory board of the EU Mission on Adaptation. And she will be moderating our panel, our discussion today. Lenio, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jorge. It's absolutely lovely to see you all here and absolutely amazing to be sitting between these two amazing women. And I'm the Global Chief Heat Officer, so I have to say a couple of words about heat. So as you all know, and I'll just remind you, this July we had the hottest day ever recorded. This summer we had the hottest temperatures ever recorded on the surfaces of our oceans. This summer was the hottest summer for the Northern Hemisphere ever recorded. This September was the hottest month ever recorded. And 2023 seems that it's going to be the hottest year ever recorded in the history of the planet. So human beings have not been living in settlements that have been dealing with these kinds of temperatures because we know that just a couple of weeks ago, we hit the mark of 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial era. And this is a new thing for the planet. And this is like really important to kind of take in. And heat, we've been talking about global warming for a very long time, but we haven't really been talking about heat and how, like we talk a lot about sea level rise or flooding or a lot of other things, but we haven't really been focusing, even though we've been talking about global warming, on how heat is going to affect our people and our ecosystems, because heat really affects the living bodies, the living cells, as opposed to build infrastructure, right? So, it's important to realize that the kind of heat that we're dealing with already, but we will be dealing with, has and is claiming a really large number of human lives. And it's also destroying ecosystems. But the number of people that we're losing from extreme heat is staggering. And I think very little policymakers and decision makers actually realize that. We have data from 2022 in Europe, where at first we thought it was 15 to 20,000 people that died from heat on the summer of 2022. And there was a new research that showed that the number of deaths linked to the heat of the summer 22 was actually above 61,000 people. 61,000 people for Europe is kind of unbelievable, especially if you compare it to deaths related to other kind of disasters. It's in the hundreds in relation to the thousands, the dozens of thousands. So this is in Europe where we have good data, or relatively good data, and this is in Europe where we can actually probably deal with the problem because we have the means, and if we actually get our acts together, it's easier to confront it. But in the Global South, things are much harder. And heat has this incredible capacity to bring to the forefront inequities, socioeconomic inequities. And this can be in a city, or this can be in a continent. And it's like it almost goes and finds who are the people that are the vulnerable people, like the people that are sick, the people that are little kids, the people that are old people, and especially the people that work with low wages and the people that live in really bad conditions of structures and houses that they live in. So it finds where weakness is, and it really targets livelihoods, and also lives, survival. So to come to our panel and finish this little introduction, I should say that women, and we know now, because we've started to measure it, bear a much larger burden for this type of risk and this type of exposure than men do. And recently, the R Stroke Resilience Center did a research called the Scorched Divide that actually has measured in India, Nigeria, and the US how women, exactly because they work many more hours, because they take care of people after they finish their normal job. And I should say that in India, for example, in the construction business, we have 50% of the people working in construction is women. So because we always think of construction for men, but for India, for example, and in other countries, a lot of women are working there, not to talk about agriculture, but also in homes, just cooking. I mean, it's insane the type of heat that women are exposed to, and for the duration, the long times that they are exposed to more to this type of thing. So I am extremely honored to kind of start this discussion with Secretary Clinton, the director of SEVA, Rima Nanavati, and I'll start with Secretary Clinton and ask you to tell us a little bit about the Global Climate Resilience Fund that you started in February 2023, part of which is the resilience insurance for women, but this is a bigger fund for women, and I will ask Rima to talk a little bit about the micro insurance part of it, but I would like you to tell a little bit about what is the vision for it and how do you think it will support women of SEVA.
Thank you so much, Lenio, and I want to thank Jorge, Fred, and everybody associated with the Atlantic Council, which houses the Arstrock Resilience Center, for the really significant work that is being done to highlight this issue. And honestly, I think the work that has been done is among the first and most important to sound the alarm about heat, about extreme heat. And in a partnership with the Center and the Clinton Global Initiative, we are determined to really focus as much attention and come up with practical actions to deal with the impact of heat, because we see this, as you just so well described, as a problem that is finally getting the attention. People have died from heat, going back into history. I mean, I remember, every couple of years in the United States, and then reading about, Europe, where we had better records, as you said, Lenio, that, there would be heat waves, and the very people you were describing, the elderly, the ill, people with no ability to escape the heat, we'd have an increase in fatalities. But the 61,000 in Europe, which was measurable, is just literally a small snapshot of what is happening globally. So extreme heat has to be viewed as one of the most dangerous results of the changing climate. And so what are we going to do about it? I mean, it is happening, and we know it's happening. And while we race to find, big changes and transitions that have to go on, we have to worry about what's happening on the ground with so many millions of people, in particular women. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One, the biological reason that you referenced, the vulnerability, literally at the cellular level, to exposure to extreme heat. And also combine that with the kind of work that so many women, particularly, as Rima will tell you, in places like India, do outside. And if they don't work, they don't get paid. So they're in the construction industry. They're, market stall women. They are trash pickers. They're recyclers. They're salt rakers, which is what I saw when I visited Sewa and went up to the desert and Rajasthan to see the salt rakers. And these are women who, they work hard, and they've worked hard, and their mothers worked hard, their grandmothers worked hard, and now all of a sudden they are finding it almost unbearable to get up with the sun and work till the sun goes down, which is what they historically have done. So now they're getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning because by 10 or 11 in the morning, it's too hot to keep working. And if they don't work, they don't make money. If they don't make money, their families suffer. So this is not just a health issue. It is an economic issue. It's a social issue, a political issue that I'm thrilled we are really raising the visibility of. So I was really introduced to this because of my long relationship with the Self-Employed Women's Association in India. And, Ela Bhatt and then Rima lead this amazing organization, in my view, one of the great nonprofit associations in the world, where women who are in the informal sector, and I hate that term because they work as hard as anybody in the so-called formal sector, and they contribute to the GDP of their countries, but they are not counted in the way that they should be counted. They are, the women who have been organized by SEWA and have been, working in solidarity to improve their lives, improve their working conditions, improve their living conditions, create more opportunities for themselves and their children. And this was really brought to my attention, by Rima, because her members, nearly 3 million now, Rima, nearly 3 million members, were reporting the impact of heat. All of a sudden, these women who are no strangers to hard work, some of the hardest working people on the planet, were finding it impossible to keep working. Or they're on a construction site and they pick up a tool and it burns their hand because it is so much hotter than it has ever been to hold. Or they are raking salt and all of a sudden they realize they can't stay out in that sun like they used to for many hours a day during the months that they were in the desert. So this is a very real problem, and we have to do several things. So when I was privileged to go with Rima into the desert, we announced a climate resilience fund because we want to raise the visibility of the issue, but we also want to find solutions. We need smart people coming together, talking and listening to people like the women on the front lines of the workforce that SEWA represents, helping us come up with solutions while, everybody meeting in the, big COP conference are trying to stave off the worst. But in the meantime, we've got to help people live and stay alive and work and make a living. And so this is a kind of bottom-up part of the solutions that we're seeking. And so the Climate Resilience Fund is meant to be a hub for people coming together to find solutions, innovative solutions, using technology, using, as Rima will talk, insurance products, creating, more opportunities for women to have time off during the day so they can cool down. I came back from India in February, and this is an aside, but it shows you how this is becoming a political issue, not just a real life, issue. And all of a sudden I see where in Texas, they're passing a law that local communities can't give time off to construction workers, who are mostly men in Texas. They can't have time off to go get a drink of water. They can't have time off to go sit under a tree. It's like they're loafing because it's 110 degrees and they have to go have a respite. So this is an issue that is at the forefront of what we mean when we talk about climate change, because it's having an impact across the board on how we work and how we live.
Thank you for that. So we've been talking about the Self-Employed Women's Association. Rima, tell us a little bit more about it and how the women came together and how it supports women's livelihoods and lives.
Thank you so much. And I feel really privileged because I think as Secretary Clinton has been a real, true, ardent supporter of SEWA, but through SEWA, therefore, the women workers in the informal sector. And that has helped us almost complete the 50 years of organizing. And when Secretary Clinton visited us, we were 2.5 million women workers, and today we are 3 million women workers. And these are women workers, as Secretary Clinton was describing, these are women workers who work from their homes. They are garment workers, incense stick rollers, kite makers, or these are women who are manual workers and service providers, so women working on the construction sites, waste collectors and recyclers, women working in the salt mines in the hot deserts of India, and women working as small farmers and agriculture workers. And we have vendors and hawkers who earn their living sitting and selling goods on the streets of the country. And I think, they not only face market shocks, but now repeated climate shocks. And I think, therefore, their lives and livelihoods both are at stake. And that's where I think, as we just heard from Secretary Clinton, that one has to have a bottom-up approach, and not just talking about adaptation and mitigation alone, but how do you build resilience of these workers, because they cannot wait, and they have started adapting on their own. But how do we now work on building resilience? I think it just not affects the lives and livelihoods, because we saw that almost 84% of these workers, because of these heat waves, repeated climate shocks with unseasonal rains. So while you are trying to adapt to a heat wave, suddenly there's a small cyclone and an unseasonal rain. And how do these women cope such situations? And we saw that 84% of these women workers in the informal sector lose their livelihoods. And you were talking about 61,000 people, but we saw that almost with one climate shock, we see that there are at least 2,000 to 3,000 of these workers who lose their lives. Not just that, but 79% of their children are dropping out from schools because the workers just cannot afford to pay for the education because of these repeated climate shocks. And we also saw that 72% of the women cannot just have one meal a day. So it leads to, malnutrition. And one thing which has really come out is the mental stress, the tension. And therefore, I think health becomes, again, a major issue. But if you allow, I want to take all of us to what Secretary Clinton just described, her visit, so that it becomes live in the room. And therefore, we all would therefore feel the urgency of a global climate resilience fund for women. So if you don't mind, can we see the video?
I remember the stories I heard in 1995. I remember the stories I heard when I visited with SEWA members when I was Secretary of State. And I remember the stories that I heard when I came here again in 2018. Your stories are stories of courage, determination, and inspiration.
7 generations, 6 generations, 5, 4, 3, 2 generations ago, it was hard work. Now it is work that has extreme heat, making it even more difficult.
આ બદલાતા વાતાવરણના કારણે અમે અમારા જીવન અને રોજગારને જોખમમાં જતા જોયા છે. અમારાથી બને એટલા અમે પ્રયાસો અને ઉપાયો પણ કર્યા છે. અમે શ્રમજીવી છીએ તો શું થયું? પરંતુ આ પરિસ્થિતિને ધ્યાનમાં રાખીને અમારા ઈલાબેન જે માર્ગદર્શન આપીને ગયા છે તો અમે સ્વચ્છ આકાશની ઝુંબેશ શરૂ કરી છે. ખેતરમાં બદલાવ લાયા, ખેતીની પદ્ધતિમાં બદલાવ લાયા, ઘરો અને ગામોને હરિયાળા બનાવ્યા, શિક્ષણ અને તાલીમો લીધી, ઘણું બધું જોયું ને ઘણું બધું શીખ્યા. હજી મારા જેવી શ્રમજીવી બહેનોના જીવનમાં અને એમના કામોમાં ફેરફાર અને સહકારની જરૂર છે. એક ચળવળની જરૂર છે.
So Rima and I started talking last summer, and she had this idea that maybe Sewa could be a partner and a model in creating a climate resilience fund. And as she talked, and as I and others who you've heard from listened, the idea became real. So today, I am proud to announce a $50 million global climate resilience fund for women. And so I have one final request of each of you. Please give us your ideas. You are the ones working. You are the ones who know what can make a difference to you. And so we need your experience and your advice, because together we're not only going to help members of Sewa, but we will create models that will help women and men and children across the world.
સંગઠનનું બળ તો અમે જીવી જાણે, પણ હવે સહકાર અને સથવારાની જરૂર છે, જેથી આપણા શરીર નબળા ના પડે, આરોગ્ય નબળું ના પડે, સંગઠન નબળું ના પડે અને પર્યાવરણ પણ નબળું ના પડે.
Thank you. And I think we all saw that, traveling into the desert, seeing the hard work of those salt pan workers, construction workers, small farmers. I think there's an urgent need for this Global Climate Resilience Fund for women. This will be the first of the kind of a fund which is for the Global South, and this is a bottom-up fund. The women have already started adaptation, mitigation, contributing towards these kind of funds. But I think what is really important is that this fund will also pilot financing instruments. It will be kind of a blended financing fund. It will also pilot insurance products like we did with the Ashrock Center and the Atlantic Council. And therefore, what kind of insurance products would eventually lead to building resilience of the workers. And I think, therefore, what we are discussing today is so timely when we are talking about the workers, and that to women workers in the informal sector.
I'll come back to the insurance, the microinsurance product, but I want to talk a little bit about women in leadership. And you are one of the, first of all, big deal women in leadership. You worked a lot as a woman in many leadership positions, but also you've established a lot of organizations and different initiatives for women to really support women's livelihoods, but also voices, and kind of allow them to become more, attain more leadership. I can't think of the word. But I want you to talk to us a little bit about what do you think that women bring to leadership, especially for climate resilience and adaptation? What are the three things that come to mind when you think of women in leadership position for adaptation and leadership? And the second part of this question is, what advice would you give to people that put together initiatives to make sure that women are supported to go to leadership? So let's start with the first one and then go to the second.
Well, look, I think in a perfect world, and we don't live in a perfect world, you would not need specific efforts, organizations, initiatives, because you would assume that whoever the leaders were, they would be able to understand and act on behalf of everyone they represented. But the fact is that we not only don't live in a perfect world, but we have seen repeatedly that women's lives, women's work is often an afterthought, if it's a thought at all. And it just doesn't rise to the level that it needs to in order for policy makers to pay attention and to act. So therefore, it's been a, kind of an absolute necessity over years to try to lift up, women leaders and women organizations to get voices heard, to have a seat at the table, so to speak, to be part of the process of making decisions about our lives. And it's really important to see this in the context of a quite visible pushback on women's rights and opportunities going on. The leaders of a number of countries, big countries, have basically sent the message out that, women need to get out of the formal workforce, women need to get home, women need to, have more babies. That was an explicit statement by Xi Jinping, the president of China, in the last month. We also see changes in legislation to both encourage and undermine, the role of women, in the sense that encourage to, sort of withdraw from the formal economy, and undermine the rights of women who are, seeking equality. So, it's not only that we have to do more to make sure women's voices are heard, we have to be conscious of the fact that we're now sort of swimming against a tide that has turned against women in many parts of the world. And, in many of the governments that are here represented at COP, there are some governments that have no women and some governments with very few women. And so how do we get the concerns of women, particularly when it comes to climate, to be heard? And that's, what events like this are about. It's what organizations like SEWA is about. But we have to redouble our efforts, because otherwise we will not get the kinds of creative, important, practical solutions that we need. And I think, Lenio, it's really encouraging to see so many NGOs, so many activists, and so many young women who are part of the efforts to raise these important climate-related issues. But we also have to keep working on those who are in power already. You can't forget about the people who are going to be making the decisions here at COP and going forward. So I would say three quick things. Number one, we need to have more women at every level of decision making in the public, the private, the not-for-profit sector. I mean, that one of my favorite American politicians was Shirley Chisholm. You may have heard of her, an African-American woman who was in Congress who, ran for president, which was a gutsy thing to do, I would say. And one of her famous lines was, you need to have a seat at the table. If they don't give you a seat at the table, pull up a folding chair. Literally find your way into wherever those tables are, those real and metaphorical tables. And number two, find solidarity with other organizations, other like-minded people. Part of the reason I so strongly support SEWA is that it has been that voice for voiceless women for 50 years. And it has been, persistent in trying to make a difference. And there are organizations like that literally throughout the world. But anything that any of us can do to help support them, to fund them, to raise their visibility, to give them a voice, we need to do. And then I think that this issue about women and climate and resilience and health needs to be put on every political agenda. So if somebody is running for office, they need to be asked, what are you going to do about ensuring that people are resilient and that women have special challenges, because whatever the climate change is that's going to impact, whether it's increasing, climate shocks, weather patterns, storms, droughts, heat, they're going to impact, women and children more dramatically everywhere. So I think there's just, we need to see it as a political movement that we are all part of.
And Rima, can you talk a little bit now about the microinsurance and how does it actually support women, and how does it help?
Definitely, and I think what I was saying and what Secretary Clinton just said, that we need to ask people who are in power also that how would you build resilience against the climate shocks. And I think what we did in partnership with the Ashrock Center, with the Clinton Global Initiative, and what we are going to do now through the Global Climate Resilience Fund is exactly that, demonstrative pilots. And I think when the temperatures in the deserts reached 52 degrees centigrade, when I was offered a fan, I said that I come from a region which is far more hotter, so we don't need a fan right now here in this room. But I think these workers have to work day and night up open in the sky. The construction workers, as we saw, when they go out to construct others' homes, but during that extreme heat period, those women, because they don't have water to keep themselves hydrated, they fall from the scaffoldings which are there, and there's nothing to protect them. And that's where I think we piloted the heat wave, the parametric heat wave insurance program. As I said, that 84% of these workers lose their lives, but also livelihoods. And unless and until your livelihoods are stabilized, you cannot think of any thing that what will I do next day for my family, for my children? Will I be able to work? Will I not be able to work? And that's where I think this heat insurance program, when it is triggered, provides them with, both financial support so that, the households can access healthcare services. They don't have to pull out children from schools because they can't go to work and therefore can't afford to pay the fees. Or, at least the nutrition of the family is also maintained. And then there are some wraparound services also, because just giving money alone may not help. So how can these families have containers which are insulated so that they keep the water cool? Otherwise, in the desert where Secretary Clinton went, the water starts boiling when it's 52 degrees centigrade. So whether I drink tea or I drink water, it's the same. And how do I keep myself hydrated? So you do need to give them containers which are insulated. You do need to create some things which will keep their roof cool. So how do you do that? So we provide, those kind of wraparound services for construction workers. How do they keep themselves hydrated out in the open on the construction sites? The small children very often go and work on those sites. And I think with that experience, I think, which we would be very soon also bringing out the learnings, how do we use the Global Climate Resilience Fund and work together with, the Ashrock Center, Atlantic Council, to design climate insurance, because it's not just heat wave, but then there is suddenly a cyclone, or there's an unseasonal rain, or there are floods. And so how do you build resilience of these workers? As I would really like to say that these women workers, they don't want charity. They want a life of dignity and self-respect. And I think, therefore, what Secretary Clinton was saying, these women are showing us, ways on how do women play a major role in climate action, both in adaptation and mitigation. And that's where I think we really need to not just stabilize their own livelihoods, but even the tiny and micro enterprises of these women workers, so that they're able to scale up as well.
I just want to add that the insight that the REMA, the Ashrock Center have had goes far beyond women in the informal sector. We need to rethink the insurance industry. Right now, insurance companies are pulling out of so many places. They're not insuring homes. They're not insuring businesses. And think about that. I mean, as the climate changes, as storms increase, as drought and heat increase, it's not just, poor, hardworking women in India. It's people everywhere who are going to be left out with no backup, no insurance for their business, for their home, their livelihood. So I actually think that the work that you all are starting to think through, what does that mean, has such huge implications far beyond what we're talking about, women in the salt, raking salt in the desert. But we're talking about people who live on the coasts. We're talking about farmers who are now unable to plant the crops they used to plant or have as many harvests because of drought. This has got a huge sweep. So the people who think about how to do this insurance reform are going to be so far ahead of the curve, because I think it's going to... People in the North, people in the United States, Europe, we're going to wake up and say, what do you mean I can't get insurance? What do you mean an algorithm has said that I can no longer renew my insurance? What does that mean? So your insight into what you were seeing on the ground in India, I think has such implications far beyond. So that's why I'm also excited about this, because it doesn't stop just with the informal workforce. It's going to affect all of us. And I've been, as a senator, and other positions I've held, going into a place where there's been a natural disaster and meeting people who didn't have insurance because they couldn't afford it or they didn't think they needed it is tragic. But now you can't get it. And so what does that actually mean for our economy and for where we live and what kind of challenges we're going to have? So this is a really exciting but also necessary kind of effort.
This is a good example of how problems with extreme heat, or generally with extreme phenomena and building resilience, are very local, and they're very different. And this is why it's important, and why we're talking about kind of doing a bottom-up approach. And this idea of how, from the bottom, we can actually affect insurance, for example, the insurance sector, is an interesting example of from the local kind of scaling up and bringing change. So I wanted to ask you, just following up on this, for heat and gender resilience, have you thought of other ways that maybe through the private sector or other different, maybe innovation and scientific innovation stuff, we can actually scale up solutions? Like where are the triggers? Where are the keys that we can actually use?
Well, that's why I'm so committed to this, because I think your question's absolutely on point, and I think we have to all do a lot more thinking and working, and we need to be convening some roundtables with, insurance companies, with, climate forecasters, with all kinds of people who have a stake in us figuring out how to answer that question. It goes from the simplest things of, okay, if construction workers everywhere in the world are going to be facing extreme heat, do we have to, model different kinds of tools? I mean, that seems sort of simple, but it's going to be profound. If you can't hold a tool because of the heat, what do you put on your hand? What is on the handle of the tool? So that would be like a great project for, students at universities to compete. Like, how do we do this? And it might be different in India than it would be in Spain or in the United States, but people need to start thinking about that. And obviously I said the same thing about insurance. What's a new insurance product? How does the existing insurance industry think about it? And are there startups in the insurance world who are going to be more creative to fill the gaps that are now going to be out there? What does that model look like? What do we think when we think about extreme heat, particularly? What do we think about shading public spaces, and using some of the kinds of shading you can put on public spaces, like public parking lots? Putting solar panels on top of those, that construction. But even just walking here, you see those big canopies overhead. Yes. How do we make that more cost effective? And who produces those? And who designs them? And who can afford them? Because obviously they're beautiful here, but might not be appropriate, for Ahmedabad or someplace else. But things like that, we're going to have to re-envision urban planning to take into account extreme heat and climate shocks. So, extreme heat and flooding, where you've never had flooding before, I think are two of the big challenges that urban planners have to start, really taking into account, and elected officials and decision makers as well. So those are some of the things, but that's why what the Arsh Rock Center and what we're trying to do at CGI, we want to catalyze those conversations, because I'm not an insurance expert. I can't sit here and tell you how to design products. I'm not an urban planner, but convening the people who are and posing the questions and coming up with new ideas and new products, new services, that's what we have to be focused on now.
Thank you. This is there's a lot at stake, and there's a lot of work to be done, and it's a big call, because it has to be interdisciplinary. We have to be very careful about maladaptation, because even the type of products that we might need to be creating, we have to figure out how to create them in ways that don't create more GHG emissions. How we make our cities and how we do infrastructure is again, we have to think of resilience and how systemically it will affect other sectors and other parts of ecosystems. Big deal. We have to realize what we're doing and how the ecosystems are influenced, because they are our support and they are our best shield towards heat and flooding and everything. And I have to close this. I had a few questions, but I have to close this, and I just want to say that heat, as very eloquent kind of said from my co-speakers, is the mother lode. Extreme rains and flooding go up because of heat, because heat is more humidity goes into the atmosphere, and these incredible torrential rains happen in ways that we've never seen it before. Heat creates droughts. Heat kind of creates these extreme kind of conditions of wildfires and of losing what is really our best protection against increasingly extreme weather conditions. 2023, as I said in the beginning, to wrap it up, is the hottest year. It's probably going to be the coolest year of the rest of our lives. Think about that and try to empower women, because they know what to do, because they really are dealing with the challenges in ways that few people are, because they're taking care of their communities. And if you get the buy-in of the women, you get the buy-in of the community as well. And thank you so much, and everybody that's in the room, for being here.
Can I? Yes, we always close with a song.
Wait, you just have to understand, this is one of the great things about Sewa. When I first experienced this back in whatever year that was, 1994, it was just amazing. So everybody, just stay for a minute. Let Rima work her magic.
But before I do the magic wand, but I want to say that when Secretary Clinton says that women's rights are their fundamental rights, and I would like to add here, Secretary Clinton, that having access to clean air, clean water, and clean soil. So having access to a healthier environment and climate is a fundamental right of every woman on this earth and every mankind on this earth. So I think that's what we all need to resolve as well, and that's what is our resolve, so that we all can celebrate 100 years together coming forward. But we always end with a song. And we will create a hopeful environment as well. So my sisters will also join, and we all can also join. Ame par karishu, ame par karishu, ame par karishu ek din. Oh unda antarma amne che vishwas, ame par karishu ek din. We shall overcome, we shall overcome, we shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in our hearts we do believe we shall overcome someday. एक है Zindabad. Thank you. Thank you.